A private meeting, somewhere in Mexico. The year is 1989. The exact location was never confirmed. The exact date is still debated. But according to multiple accounts that have circulated for more than 3 decades, a group of the most powerful traffickers in Mexico gathered at the request of one man to do something that had never been done before. They gathered to divide a country. The man who called them together was the most powerful drug lord Mexico had ever produced. For years, he had sat at the head of a single organization that controlled nearly the entire flow of drugs from Mexico into the United States. There were no separate cartels. There was no map of competing territories. There was one empire, and he ran it. But he knew his time was ending. The pressure on him had become unbearable. And so, before he fell, he made a decision that would shape the next 40 years of bloodshed. He carved up his empire and handed the pieces to his most trusted lieutenants. You take Tijuana, you take Juárez, you take Sinaloa, you take the corridors of the Northeast. Each man would run his own plaza, his own gateway into the United States. And together, that was the idea they would keep the peace. Partners, a federation, a family business spread across a map. It was meant to prevent war. Instead, it drew the front lines of every war that followed. This is the story of that map, the map of Mexico's cartels, and of the single, brutal truth that has defined it from that day to this one, that in the Mexican drug trade, the deadliest enemy has almost never been the police, or the army, or a stranger from a rival organization. The deadliest enemy has almost always been a former friend. Because the history of the Mexican cartels is not really a history of cops and criminals, or of one cartel against another. It is, again and again, the same story told in different decades, with different names. 2 men build something together. They trust each other. They divide the spoils. And then one of them turns. The map of Mexico is not a map of territories. It is a map of betrayals. Let us walk it, line by line. To understand the map, we have to start with the man who drew it. In the 1980s, the entire Mexican drug trade ran through a single organization based in the city of Guadalajara. Its leader was a former police officer turned trafficker, a man so dominant that he was known simply as El Padrino, the Godfather. Under him, the Guadalajara organization moved marijuana and increasingly Colombian cocaine into the United States on a scale no Mexican group had ever achieved. He was the bridge between the great Colombian suppliers and the largest drug market on earth. And the men who would later become the bosses of every major cartel in Mexico all, at one time, worked beneath him. For a while, there was no need for a map. There was only him. But in 1985, his organization made the mistake that would destroy it. A United States drug enforcement agent named Enrique Camarena, known to almost everyone as Kiki, was abducted in Guadalajara. He had been working undercover, and his investigations had struck directly at the heart of the organization's operations. Weeks later, his body was found. He had been killed. The murder of an American federal agent brought a response unlike anything Mexican traffickers had ever faced. The United States launched one of the most aggressive investigations in its history. It pressed the Mexican government relentlessly, and one by one, the leaders of the Guadalajara organization were hunted down. In 1989, the Godfather himself was captured. It was from that point, facing the end of his reign, that he is said to have divided his empire among his lieutenants. He could not run it from a cell. So rather than let it collapse into a free-for-all, he attempted to impose order on its breakup. The corridors of Mexico were parceled out, each to a trusted man or family, with the understanding that they would coordinate, share the routes, and avoid war. And the moment he did it, the single organization became many. The Federation became a collection of separate powers, each with its own boss, its own territory, its own ambitions, and its own reasons, in time, to resent the others. The map had been drawn. Now it would learn to bleed. The first line on the map to catch fire was the one between Tijuana and Sinaloa. On the western side, in the border city of Tijuana, the corridor went to a family, the Arellano Felix brothers. They built one of the most disciplined and violent organizations of the era, a tightly held family operation that controlled the most valuable crossing point between Mexico and California. On the other side stood the man who had been given Sinaloa, a rising and ferociously ambitious trafficker the world would come to know as El Chapo. These two were not supposed to be enemies. They were peers, fellow heirs to the same divided empire, men who had served the same godfather. But the corridors they had been handed bordered each other, and the rivalry between them turned with stunning speed into open war. In November of 1992, gunmen sent by the Tijuana organization attempted to kill El Chapo at a nightclub in the resort city of Puerto Vallarta. The attack left several people dead, but El Chapo escaped. The following year, in May of 1993, came one of the most shocking events in the entire history of the Mexican drug trade. At the airport in Guadalajara, a Catholic cardinal was killed in a sudden burst of gunfire while sitting in his car. The investigation pointed to gunmen from the Tijuana organization, and according to the official account, their real target had been El Chapo, who was at the same airport that day. They had, in this version, killed a cardinal by mistake. The death of a cardinal forced the Mexican state to act as it never had before. National outrage, the involvement of the Catholic Church, and intense international attention turned the full weight of the government against both organizations. The pressure that followed would, in time, help dismantle the Arellano Felix family. Over the following years, the brothers fell one by one. One was killed in a confrontation in Mazatlan in 2002. Another, the strategic head of the family, was captured the same year, eventually extradited to the United States, where he remains. The most disciplined family cartel of the 1990s was slowly taken apart. But the war between Tijuana and Sinaloa had established the pattern that would repeat across the entire map. The men who had been handed the country together had turned on each other almost immediately. And El Chapo, the man at the center of that first war, would spend the next 3 decades at the center of nearly every war that came after. Because while Tijuana fell, Sinaloa rose. El Chapo, alongside his partner Ismael Zambada, known as El Mayo, built the Sinaloa cartel into the most powerful organization in the country. And as it grew through alliances. Sinaloa was, for years, the center of a vast web of partnerships with other families, other bosses, other organizations who moved product alongside it and shared its roots. It was less a single cartel than a federation in its own right, a coalition of powerful men held together by mutual profit. Every one of those alliances would eventually break, and almost everyone would break the same way. Consider the Gulf Cartel. In the Northeast, the old organization along the Texas border, with roots running back to the Prohibition era. Its leader, a man history would call the friend killer, had already shown the entire country how this story works. He had taken sole control of his own organization by killing his closest partner, the friend who had ruled beside him. That single act gave him his name. And then, fearing betrayal from within, fearing, perhaps, exactly the kind of thing he himself had just done, he built a guard to protect himself. He recruited an army of deserters from Mexico's elite special forces, men trained, with bitter irony, in a unit created in part to fight drug traffickers. He called them Los Zetas. For years, they were the Gulf Cartel's shield-disciplined, militarized, more lethal than any cartel enforcers before them. But in 2010, the shield turned. By then, their creator had been captured and extradited to the United States. And the army he had built no longer answered to anyone. Los Zetas split from the Gulf Cartel and became an independent power. The war between the creator's organization and its own former guard tore the northeast of Mexico apart, turning the cities along the Texas border into battlegrounds and emptying whole towns. The most disciplined enforcers in the country had betrayed the organization that built them exactly as their own founder had once betrayed the friend who stood beside him. The map was bleeding in the northeast now too, and it was about to bleed inside the most powerful family on it. In 2008, the betrayal came home to Sinaloa itself. For years, the Beltran Leyva brothers had been among the closest allies of El Chapo partners, near family pillars of the Sinaloa organization. They controlled key operations and corridors. They commanded their own armed forces. They moved enormous quantities of product. They were trusted at the very center of the Federation. And then, in early 2008, one of the brothers, Alfredo, known as El Mochomo, was arrested by Mexican authorities. The Beltran Leyva organization came to believe that El Chapo himself had given him up, had traded a partner to the government to protect his own position and remove a rival. Whether or not that belief was true, its consequence was immediate and catastrophic. The Beltran Leyva brothers broke from Sinaloa and went to war against their former allies. Partners of many years became enemies overnight. The war was vicious, and it reshaped the balance of power across central Mexico. In December of 2009, the leader of the breakaway organization, Arturo Beltran Leyva, was killed in a prolonged confrontation with Mexican Marines in the city of Cuernavaca. But the war the brothers had launched shattered the unity of the Sinaloa world and added another set of lines to the map drawn, once again, not between strangers, but between men who had once called each other brothers. And in the same years, another Sinaloa alliance was collapsing. In the city across the river from El Paso, the Juárez cartel, the organization built by the Lord of the Skies, the trafficker who flew cocaine into Mexico by the plane load and died in 1997, trying to change his own face on an operating table, had long been allied with Sinaloa. The two organizations shared the corridors. They kept the peace between them. For years, it held. But in 2004, that peace ended in the way they always seem to end. According to U.S. prosecutors, El Chapo ordered the killing of one of the Juárez boss's brothers, Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes. The Juárez organization answered in kind, ordering, in turn, the killing of one of El Chapo's own brothers, who was killed inside a Mexican prison. Two former partners had killed each other's blood. And the war that followed turned Ciudad Juárez into one of the deadliest cities on earth. The Juárez cartel fought through its armed enforcement wing, an organization known as La Línea, and through cross-border street gangs that operated on both sides of the river. Sinaloa pushed back with everything it had. In its worst years, the city a major urban center directly on the American border, visible from El Paso, Texas recorded more than 3,000 homicides in a single year. The conflict between the two former allies claimed, by the figures cited in U.S. court filings, at least 8,000 lives, and turned an entire generation of one city's childhood into a war. By now, a pattern should be unmistakable. Tijuana and Sinaloa peers who turned on each other. The Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas, a creator and the army it built, who turned on each other. The Beltran Leyva brothers and El Chapo partners and near family, who turned on each other. Juárez and Sinaloa allies, who killed each other's brothers. Every major line on the map, drawn by a broken trust, and the betrayals were not only between organizations, they ran inside them too. Los Zetas, the army of soldiers who had betrayed the Gulf Cartel, were themselves torn apart from within. At the top sat two men, the disciplined founding commander known as Zed 3, and the relentless operator beneath him, the former street lookout known as Zed 40. The two had completely different visions of what the organization should be, and as the gap between them widened, the cartels split into factions loyal to one or the other. In October of 2012, the commander was killed by Mexican Marines on a quiet baseball field in a small northern town, traveling with almost no protection, located, almost certainly, by an anonymous tip from inside his own ranks. The man who took absolute control within 24 hours was Zed 40. And the smoothness of that transition suggested he had been preparing for the moment. That same night, an armed group stole the commander's body from the funeral home before it could be examined, and it was never seen again. But the cycle did not stop there. 9 months later, Z40 himself was captured, given up in turn, by another informant from inside the organization. The man who had very likely reached the top through internal betrayal was brought down by internal betrayal. The cartel, built on military discipline, died of its own disloyalty. Its leaders, captured, would eventually be sent across the border to face justice in American courtrooms. The same story, always the same story, drawn smaller and smaller, but never changing shape. By the 2010s, a new power was rising on the map, and it too was born from a fracture. When a senior Sinaloa-aligned figure named Nacho Coronel was killed by the army in 2010, the organization beneath him shattered. From that fracture, a man called El Mencho built something new, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. He announced it to the world through a chillingly clever piece of branding, a group presenting itself, at first, as vigilantes, whose mission was to wipe out Los Zetas, casting themselves as protectors rather than criminals. Once, El Mencho had worked inside the Sinaloa world. Now, his organization rose to challenge it directly. And when El Chapo was finally captured for the last time in 2016 and sentenced to life in an American prison, the CJNG surged into the vacuum, growing into a rival powerful enough to match Sinaloa itself, heavily armed, willing to confront the Mexican state directly, and dominant in the trade of fentanyl, the synthetic drug at the center of a public health catastrophe in the United States. The defining war of the modern era CJNG against Sinaloa was, like all the others, a war between people who had once been on the same side. The map had simply drawn a new line in the same old way. And in February of 2026, that chapter took its own violent turn. El Mencho was killed in a military operation, and his organization was left fighting over what he had built, the cycle of succession and bloodshed beginning again. And then came the deepest betrayal of all, the Sinaloa Cartel, the great survivor. The organization that had outlasted Tijuana, outlasted Juárez, outlasted the Beltran Leyva. The organization that had been at the center of the map since the day it was drawn finally turned on itself. In July of 2024, El Mayo Zambada, the co-founder of the cartel, the man who had evaded capture for half a century and had never spent a single day in prison, was lured to a meeting and handed over to the United States. According to the accounts that followed, the person who delivered him was the son of his own partner, the son of El Chapo, the most untouchable man in the entire history of the Mexican drug trade, was brought down not by an army, not by the law, but by a betrayal from within his own founding family. And the consequence was a civil war. The cartels split into two factions, those loyal to El Mayo's people and those loyal to the sons of El Chapo. The two halves of the organization that had ruled the map for 30 years turned their weapons on each other in the streets of their own home state. The violence that followed has, by the figures cited in international reporting, left more than 5,000 people dead or missing, and it has not yet ended. The cartel that won every war on the map finally lost the only one it could not win, the one against itself. And so the map, as it stands today, is not a map of victors. It is a map of ruins. The godfather who drew it grew old in prison. The Tijuana brothers, who got the first plaza, are dead or imprisoned in the United States. The Lord of the Skies of Juárez died on that operating table in 1997, and the last boss of his family now sits in an American courtroom awaiting his fate. The friend killer of the Gulf Cartel served his time in the United States and was returned, an aging man, to a maximum security cell in Mexico. The commanders of Los Zetas await trial in the United States, facing the most severe penalties American law allows. El Chapo is serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison in Colorado. El Mayo has pleaded guilty in an American court and faces life. El Mencho was killed in early 2026, his empire now contested. And the Sinaloa cartel, the great survivor, is tearing itself apart in the streets of Culiacan. Almost every name handed a piece of the map in 1989, and almost every name that rose to power after has met the same end. Captured, killed, or, most often of all, betrayed. And so we are left, as we so often are with these stories, with a set of questions that may never have clean answers. Was the war on this map ever truly avoidable, or did it all flow from a single decision in 1989 to divide an empire among men who could never be made to trust one another? Is there any version of the Mexican drug trade in which the partners did not turn on the partners? Or is betrayal simply the nature of a business built entirely on the absence of law, where there are no contracts, no courts, and no way to enforce loyalty except through fear and blood? And the largest question of all, when the current war ends, and one faction or another emerges from the ruins of Sinaloa, how long before that victor too is undone by someone who once stood beside it? Some of those answers may emerge in the courtrooms and the conflicts of the years ahead. Others, as so often happens in the history of organized crime in Mexico, may never come at all. What is certain is this: the map of Mexico's cartels was drawn in a single room in 1989 by one man trying to prevent a war. He divided his empire among partners, and he asked them to keep the peace. They did not keep the peace. They could not. Because the thing he had built was a business with no law inside it, where the only currency stronger than money was trust, and where trust, in the end, was always the first thing to be spent. Every border on that map was drawn by a handshake. And every one of those borders, sooner or later, was redrawn in the breaking of it. Tijuana and Sinaloa, the Gulf Cartel and its own army, the Beltran Leyva and the brother they called a friend, Juárez and the ally who killed their blood, the two commanders of Los Zetas, the CJNJ and the world it came from, and finally, Sinaloa itself, split down the middle by the son of its own founder. In the Mexican drug trade, the enemy was never really across the map. The enemy was always the person standing next to you. If this story showed you the hidden complexity behind the headlines, subscribe to Sleeping Crimes. Every week, we unravel the stories we need to understand, not to glorify crime, but to understand its real impact. Turn on notifications. We'll see you at the next crime.